Good evening, everyone. My name's James Rogers. I'm Senior Lecturer in International Journalism here at the university. It's great to see so many of you here this evening. Before Nik begins his presentation, I'd like to ask the Dean of the Faculty, Professor John Gabriel, to say a few words of introduction.
Thank you, James, and good evening, everyone, from me. As Dean of the Faculty, I'm particularly pleased to welcome you all here to what promises to be a fascinating talk by BBC World News' Nik Gowing. We're delighted to have Nik here at the university because I think his presence says a lot about what the area of media communications and journalism tries to do in its teaching and education, and that is to bring together the worlds of academia with the world of the practitioner and build bridges between the two. I'm also especially pleased that in addition to our students, many of whom I see in front of me from the faculty and beyond, we have a number of alumni here tonight and some prospective students, and I wish them a particularly warm welcome. I hope that this evening will give you a taste of the ideas that we discuss on our media and journalism and communications courses and how they relate to the world of news media. On that last point, this brings me to our speaker, Nik Gowing. He will be a familiar face to many, if not all of you. For 18 years, he worked for the ITN, where he was bureau chief in Rome and Warsaw, and then diplomatic editor of Channel 4 News. Since 1996, as main presenter on the BBC's international news and current affairs channel, BBC World News, he's been a familiar and authoritative figure to audiences of millions around the world. His reputation is built too on a rare combination of a leading television journalist who's also published peer-reviewed academic work, some of which he's going to share with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nik Gowing.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry it's so late. I was on air until 5:30, wearing a tie and looking a bit smarter. Don't take it as offence, but that's where I was in the studio. That's not tonight, but that's a grab of where I'd normally be. I present a program called The Hub. We led on India tonight, the fact that supermarket chains have been told that they can't have their 51% share in India, as well as, of course, what's happening in Russia, and, of course, what's happening in the Eurozone, which you're all deeply concerned about. It affects the money in your pocket, whatever you have in your pocket or on your credit card balance. But I'm putting that up there because even though John has been kind enough to say many of you will know, actually probably a lot of you don't know what I do because I don't broadcast into Britain anymore. I broadcast to a large audience along with my colleagues 24/7 around the world. On BBC World News, we have an audience of about 75-80 million, a distribution of about 280 million. So I get recognised at airports quite a lot. So I want you to know that is what I do, and that's where the program is The Hub. But it's about, what I want to share with you tonight is the kind of experiences that I as a senior presenter have, which are gelling together so many of the areas that you are concerned about. And what I'm going to talk about is not about media necessarily. It's about something much broader. So if you're in international relations, whether you're in social policy, whether you're in business, this is about what should worry you as well. Therefore, I'm not just projecting into the media environment. And what I want to do is talk for about 40 minutes. And I've got an enormous number of examples, but the theme of what I want to get over to you is a sky full of lies and black swans. And why do I say it like that? What on earth does that mean? This is that peer-reviewed document that the Dean talked about, which you can actually download for free, and I'm not here to advertise it. But you need to know about the kind of traction that this has got. I published it more than 2 years ago now. Skyful of Lies. If any of you remember Burma 4 years ago, those extraordinary pictures of the monks who were protesting on the streets of Rangoon and Mandalay, and the earlier versions of what we were using then, these mobile phones, we could get them out. And the government then said it's not happening. It is a sky full of lies. Black swans, we don't realize what we don't realize. It's not just about us in the media business, but it's also the political leaders, the corporate leaders, those who are running institutions of power. And that's what this work is about. it was predicting and forecasting much of what has taken place, particularly in the last year. And if I had been here on December the 7th last year, and James invited me, I have to say, in February of this year, it's taken 9 months to get me here, not because I've been avoiding him, but simply finding a way of making our schedules work together, I would have been saying, watch out. There are things at work here which are going to cause problems for big corporates. Then you'd have seen the British Airports Authority and the problems that many of you probably experienced with the amount of snow at Heathrow Airport. And then, of course, we've had Tunisia, followed by Egypt, followed by Libya, followed by what's happening at this very moment in Syria. You need to understand that, because what you've seen is an enormous compression of an amazing number of things which have been going on, many of which you could say were predictable because of the power of this and what you have in your pocket. And that's the root of what I want to get over to you tonight. Who controls shifting information power in crises? Now, I have to say, I haven't written about it, but I've been warning about what would happen in Russia with Putin. And James spent a long time there. But what has happened in the last 3 days since the Sunday elections has not been unexpected. But are we seeing, and I realize I'm being recorded here, and I therefore have to qualify how I put it, but when you see not just 600 protesters in the center of Moscow, but the way in which they've convened each other, the way, and I remember Moscow before there were even mobile phones, and there's now 40% broadband coverage in Russia. These are now challenges, like in Burma, a Skyful of lies. These are now challenges to those in positions of power. Whether you're Prime Minister Putin, hoping to be president, and he probably will be, but he's now facing a backlash. But think of what's going on there. And it's a bit like what happened in Egypt, and what happened in Libya, and what's happening in Syria at the moment, and what happened to the British Airports Authority, and what happened to the Japanese government and the Tokyo Electric Power Company after the earthquake on the 11th of March earlier this year, and BP in the Gulf of Mexico. What I want to do over the next 35 minutes is just bring you together a whole bundle of examples which come down to the fact that people are losing power. Those in positions of power and responsibility cannot exercise it in the way they assume, by the way they've got there. And all of what I'm going to tell you is amazingly obvious. But as I say, and I've written about, the most obvious is actually the most elusive for those in positions of power, wherever you are in the world. And let me just bring you up to date. None of us can forget what happened during August. The kind of transparency that there was on the streets of London, which brought David Cameron back. But why am I showing you this? Because of the report only a few days ago from the panel of riots, communities, and also the victims panel, and the kind of conclusions that they came up with based on what happened to Mark Duggan and what caused those riots and what caused what Newsnight dissected, and also The Guardian earlier this week. The kind of social divisions and the kind of resentment there was against the police. But what did they come up with? This conclusion: there needs to be a review of protocols, the police protocols, in the light of social media. You can no longer have no comment in a viral space because it'll be filled with rumour. Now, a year ago, I spoke to the Association of Chief Police Officers, who are the chief police officers, and this was literally a couple of days after what happened in Millbank. And I realise some of you might have been there as your students. What happened with the assault on Millbank Tower. And this is one of my prime examples. We were getting information from inside Millbank Tower. You now take it for granted from tweeting, from uploading, from blogging and so on. We were getting information, including video, from inside, which was more than the police knew.
Yeah, it's not often you get to report something from your desk and get almost as much information as if you're on the ground. Some of the things we've been hearing through social media have been absolutely incredible. We've had protesters tweeting in real time, telling us exactly what's going on, even sending footage via mobile phones.
Now, you take that for granted now,
verify that, and we've been getting
but what has been fascinating in this timeline that I've been trying to anchor, and also with the phenomenon that's been at work, is trying to convince people in positions of power and responsibility that their power is no longer what it was. And I know I'm being recorded here, But I would say to you that when I talked to the chief constables, and that was at the time just of what was going on in Northumbria with the guy who then shot himself, having shot a policeman, and also the chap up in Cumbria who had shot the taxi drivers. It's about the police officers who didn't understand that when they have some kind of press briefing in a village hall near Rothbury in Northumbria, why they're overwhelmed, not by just the traditional media, Tyne Tees Television, ITV, BBC, Sky and so on, but vast numbers of people with this. So I say, a year on, how much have they really learned about this new phenomenon? Because whatever has happened to the police is happening in the corporate world and the political world in ways which I'm going to underline to you. And I don't apologize for throwing a lot of stuff at you, because you know all this stuff. I just want to create the overarching landscape of just how much is changing, whether you're in London, or you're in Iraq, or you're in Syria, or you're in China, or you're at London Airport in a snowstorm. Look at the kind of things where social media is catching people out. And I could use you can see it by the number of slides here. I could give you slides for the next 12 hours to give you the fast-growing number of examples of what is taking place. Some of you may have been involved in this, what happened during those student protests. But there was one particular incident of the fees protest where a bit of film showed officers on horseback riding at speed into a crowd of demonstrators. Who knows, someone I show here may be actually sitting in the audience. Scotland Yard under mounting pressure after video footage emerged of officers on horseback charging into a crowd of protesters during a demonstration. Why am I showing you that? Because when journalists like The Guardian phoned up the Scotland Yard press office and said, "Are police officers charging the crowd?" the answer came back, we would say no, they did not charge the crowd. Until, of course, someone with their own camera on Whitehall had this.
They weren't pushing back, and they allowed us to protest in peace and not trapped everyone.
By my analysis, that's horses charging a crowd. And The Guardian had that on the Saturday morning saying, what's going on? Now, I'm showing you this because it helps you relate to it, because some of you may have been involved in this down in central London. And remember, I talked about the vulnerability of power, the brittleness of power in this environment. Now, this is unconnected to what I'm about to show you is unconnected to these events. But when you've got the Chief Police Officer of Britain, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, okay, it was during a particular series of challenges back in July, saying this, you can understand how difficult it is for those in positions of power and responsibility, whether in China or in downtown London, to accept there's a whole new environment.
I do think we need to handle the media different in the future, much more transparently, and we've already put those arrangements in place, and there'll be more being done in the Met.
That was July. The student protests were in November. This was about a separate issue. But there's Paul Stevenson in Parliament saying, we've got to understand that something big is changing. And what I'm seeing as a senior journalist, but also as an analyst, is it's only after the pressure is there. Whether you're in Egypt, it's too late, or Libya, it's too late, or Syria, it's too late. Only when there's that pressure do people begin to realize that something is changing dramatically. It's not changing in months and years, it's changing in weeks and days. It's taking brands, it's taking images, it's taking reputations, and it's taking careers with it. Plenty of examples. Hungary, October last year. This is a big industrial reservoir full of nasty stuff, and suddenly it breached on the morning of the 4th of October. What do people do these days when something dreadful is taking place? The first thing they seem to do is worry about where they're going and then get out their camera or their mobile phone. It's quite extraordinary, but what's that doing? It's putting into the public information space at very high speed in ways that you all accept. It's putting into the public information space confirmation of what is taking place. As a result, the chief executive of this company had to be hauled in and arrested within hours. It wasn't a matter of days. It wasn't a matter of Hungarian television sending a crew out there, because this was up and out there very quickly. And that's what we're seeing time and time again in this new environment. It is a relentless and it is a ruthless process. which just never stops in this new environment. Another example of what can happen. Here, the Qantas A380 in November of last year took off from Singapore, bang, a few minutes out of Singapore, climbing over Indonesia. An engine has gone, a near fatal explosion on board. It's not a question of waiting to interview survivors or passengers when they get off the plane. It's the fact now that, of course, they are recording what's going on.
I do apologise. I'm sure you're aware we have a technical issue with our number 2 engine. We have dealt with the situation at the moment. The aircraft is secure at this stage. We're going to have to hold for some time whilst we...
Okay, they don't know exactly what's happening, but on the plane there are people recording what's going on. It's actually great for the Qantas brand in so many ways. There were 5 fully fledged 4-ringed pilots on this A380. 2 or 3 of them were actually training. And they had 58 warning lights come up. They trained for 2 or 3, 58 warning lights. This was a near catastrophe. That wasn't known, though, by the Qantas chief executive, Alan Joyce, sitting in Sydney. He was in an executive meeting somewhere in downtown Sydney, a business meeting. He came out of that meeting about 50 minutes after this had taken place, looked at his BlackBerry. In those days, BlackBerries were working properly. And he found that the share price of Qantas had suddenly plummeted. He didn't know what had happened. Yet, on the island of Indonesia, there is the kangaroo cowling of engine number 2 from the A380. On the ground, it took probably a minute or 2 to fall to the ground. Up there, tweeted internationally, we all knew what had taken place, even before the chief executive knew. So what we're talking about here is a disconnect of the timelines. Systems which are now dysfunctional in systems of government and corporates, to understand just how profound this new environment is. Some of you, I think, come from India, and one of the examples I've used in an Indian context is what happened in Bhopal in 1984. It took more than 2 days for film to arrive in Delhi. Can you imagine that happening now? It would be a matter of minutes before the information was up and out there, tweeted, and so on. I'm telling you what you already know, but think of the implications now for those who have to handle it, whether it be Alan Joyce, sitting in Sydney, or the police commissioner here in London. We're now seeing what I would call a tyranny of real time. Wherever you are in the world, people are picking up what you've got in your pocket. And you need to think of the implications, even if their lives are at risk, of why they do this. I can't explain it to you. No doubt a psychologist will one day. But these are profound changes. In the tsunami, almost 7 years ago now, people were recording, but they had no way, no bandwidth, no ability to just step aside, go to an internet cafe and upload it. Now there's the capacity to do it, of course, extremely quickly. And it's the fact that when lives are at risk, what do people do? They pick up that camera. Here, during the earthquake in Japan.
This is like the real thing. This is the real thing.
Inside shaken homes, the noise almost deafening, furniture toppling as the structures swayed.
皆さん今東京で結構な震度、結構な地震がありました。
This man announcing on YouTube that an earthquake had just
struck. You need to ask, and this is what I'm trying to get over to you, about this new dynamic. That people do this, they're recording it in ways which you are all familiar with. But think now about the implications for power and responsibility in these times of crisis. In summary, this is what I think is going on. 3 words I want to get over to you at this point. Firstly, the mindset, question mark. Are those in positions of power and responsibility really adapting the way they think, particularly right at the top, about this new challenge? And my answer to you, by and large, is they're simply unwilling to embrace or even accept that this is now challenging them. Secondly, it's affecting their behavior and how they will respond. Now, some of you may be behavioral scientists, and I can't begin to enter into that area. But this is having a profound effect in this new environment. And ultimately, what you're seeing in this new environment, in my view, based on my research, is a significant level of denial. Why is this a level of denial? Because if I was talking to a corporate audience or a government audience, they would be talking about the media. It's easy to talk about the media. But they're thinking of the media as where I come from the BBC or from ITV or from Sky or from Al Jazeera. That's the way they are still framing their minds, understanding the kind of world that you understand so probably far better than I do, is simply not something that they generationally have wanted to embrace as they've made their way up, certainly to the top levels. That media space is getting phenomenally large in ways that you understand. 4 billion people now have mobile phones. It's probably now more like 4.2 billion. 850 million in China. 15 million new mobile phones a month in India. That's the kind of speed of expansion. It's worrying the Chinese government, and only today we've had the Indian government beginning to say, we've got to be careful about this now, which is really quite disturbing. But what is happening in this media space? It's not just the media space. The media space, in my view, has been turned upside down. Those at the bottom, or who have been at the bottom, are now at the top. They are the people with that little mobile phone who are recording and transmitting and getting it out there amazingly quickly. And in my view, it's not just the media. It's actually, I think, something far broader. It's almost four-dimensional, if that's possible. It's about a public information space now. And that's a big change. You've got to understand, of course, that everything on here is the media as such. Everything is a medium. But it's about thinking differently, understanding that this is now a public information space. Now, I would suggest to you that if you're a corporate audience or a government audience, there would be those among you who are in positions of power and responsibility, and as I'm being recorded, I have to be a little careful what I'm going to say, but who would say, oh, SH1T. In other words, what are the implications for me? Shall we push it to one side, or do we embrace it? And at the moment, I would say, by far the largest majority are unwilling to fully embrace this in the way that they should be. These are complex times in this public information space, and it's four-dimensional, even though that's technically not possible, simply because of the great complexities and the way we're all being dragged back and forth. I made the announcement of Diana's death, which is rather a long time ago now, in the days when one of these was a brick. No photos could be transmitted from the Pont d'Alma, where she and Dodi Fayed had their accident on that Saturday night. These days, there would be a proliferation of material. It would be causing us enormous challenges on taste and decency. We are now being overwhelmed in ways that any of you who've worked in a newsroom will be aware of. And I'm just giving you a taste here of what we're beginning to confront. The tweet which says Barack Obama assassinated, 2 gunshot wounds have proved too much. Barack Obama has just passed, the president is dead. What is possible? What is downright malicious in this new environment? Is it a sky full of lies? Is it all lies? Or is it actually true? The mediation, the authentication, the harvesting, and the prioritizing of this information is now becoming overwhelming. Whether you're in a newsroom or you are in a corporate environment or a government environment. Of course, Obama was not dead, but that makes people think. And it is about the credibility of this kind of stuff. So, is the problem about front page of the Sun? Media mogul's body discovered. This was at the height of what was going on in Parliament. Someone was having fun, faking the Sun front page, and it makes you think twice, think 3 times, because of the speed at which this is all happening in this environment. What I've christened the tyranny of real time. And I christened that 17 years ago at Harvard University, and most people said, go back to your planet. Now that's what is central to the core message I'm giving for you. It's the tyranny, the arbitrary and cruel nature in this new information environment of the information that's now being transmitted digitally and often virally. Rupert Murdoch, the controversial media mogul, reportedly being found dead in his garden, police announce. A fake. But it makes you think. So, in this environment, that wasn't wholly implausible given the pressure he was under. What status do we give something like this? Taken on a mobile phone, coming out of Sirte, very quickly. Do we believe it? Is that Gaddafi? Or is it someone with long hair looking just like him, who was good at fakes? In this real-time environment, we have to make a judgment like a corporate does, or a government does, or a targeter for NATO. Was that him or not? Or are we being duped? These are complicated times, because we can now draw the wrong conclusions in this new real-time environment. Here, early on in the crisis, back in January, look at the man with blood on his shirt. When did that happen? Fortunately, someone in our newsroom recognized it from many months earlier. We didn't put it out on air. But that gets a currency very quickly, underscoring this challenge of what is the status of information, how good is the information in a time of crisis, and that challenge of validation. Similarly, many of us were caught out by this, which appeared to show Syrian troops treating people in the way that is pretty obvious.
Humiliation. Perhaps he'd seen these pictures of his security personnel in action earlier this week.
It comes through, and in fact it was from something a considerable number of months earlier. Now, why does it come into the space? What do we do about it when it's in the space? Our job, certainly where I work, is to validate it. We broadcast into those areas, and we have to be sure that what we're saying is germane and accurate in this kind of environment. But look at the speed at which this phenomenon I'm trying to get over to you is changing things and having an impact on power. I'll take you now to northeast China, to a place called Dalian, which is close to the North Korean border. They had a PX chemical plant, a bit like what happened in Tokyo with the earthquake, which early in the summer, it's a brand new, very modern chemical plant. There was a typhoon, and the typhoon water inundated this chemical plant. And in a place like China, which is now of deep concern to the Communist Party, where there are, I think, 186,000 protests last year, suddenly people were so angry about the fact that this PX plant, despite all the guarantees, had been inundated by seawater. On Sunday afternoon, or Sunday morning, they were communicating with each other by mobile phone and by tweet and by Weibo, which is the equivalent of Twitter. And this is what happened. Vast numbers of people taking to the streets, just like some of you, I guess, going to Whitehall back last November. So what we're seeing also is the volume of material that's being recorded in this kind of environment at a time like this, whether you're in China or you're in a place like Syria. Because much of what we're able to do at the moment in Syria is based on this extraordinary proliferation of material being taken at great risk by a large number of people, here voiced by the BBC's Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen.
This is phone video of Syrian soldiers moving up towards Jisr al-Shagor to restore order at the request of local people, according to the regime. Pictures of demonstrations across Syria are coming in via the internet. The attempt to crush the protests by force isn't working.
You take that for granted now. If I'd said to you, we're likely to see in a Middle East country a proliferation of video coming out which is going to inform the international community of what's happening in defiance of a president and his security forces, you might have said, well, what's he been smoking? But what we're seeing here is a profound change. And what's extraordinary about this is, of course, as in Libya, the fact that networks built up amazingly quickly, not just to record, but to validate and give us the evidence that they validated the mobile phone footage before they circulated. They became like journalists. We have to validate it at the BBC. But they were creating this picture, and we could put up a map showing video coming from different parts of Syria. Now, the president has said to ABC News in the last 24 hours, well, most of it was simply not right. But we've been through a validation process with others on phones and so on to make sure it is. And that's why we feel so confident about portraying what's been happening in Syria, validated by people on the ground at great risk. But what's different? What's the difference, if any, between that and Kate Winslet and Richard Branson's 90-year-old mum, when someone accidentally set fire to his house on Neckar Island? What did they do? They picked up a camera and they became the journalists, if you like. The recorders, what I like to call the bearers of witness. They're not doing my job for me, but what they're doing is at least recording what took place. And that, of course, is what happened very effectively during the summer here in London, particularly in so many parts of the city. Whether with that video, which I showed you earlier, which you'll be familiar with, or someone down in Clapham on his way home, recording what was happening before even the Metropolitan Police knew about it. This is the same as what was happening in Dalian, what was happening in Burma. This is the phenomenon which is now prolific and omnipresent.
It's exactly 10 o'clock, and this is Curry's Digital, just up the road from Clapham Junction. For the last 3/4 of an hour, kids have been in and out of this store, taking whatever they want, really. Some of the stuff they haven't even been able to take. There's a flat screen television here, you can see lying broken on the floor, a video recorder there, coat hangers all over the place, and these are a couple of people who appear to have been at it.
Are you enjoying this?
No, I live here, I'm just astounded at what you're doing.
Well, we're getting our taxis back.
You're getting your taxes back? What do you mean by that?
But they're good television reporters. Our job is at risk. Because what he was doing with his mobile phone was exactly the kind of thing that I've spent most of my career doing, one way or the other, and some of you as well. These are providing the real-time, the tyranny of real-time, the access and the clear perception of what is going on, often before, as in Millbank Tower, those in positions of power and responsibility know what's going on. Whether you are in Clapham in South London or earlier this year in somewhere like Libya.
Libya is burning and the fire has spread. Scenes that would have been unthinkable just 1 week ago are being secretly recorded and smuggled across the internet by activists. These are the latest images, apparently from the capital itself. For a regime that's crushed dissent without mercy, this is the most serious challenge it's ever faced.
And what corralled that challenge and made it so potent was, of course, that. I said the most obvious is the most elusive. It's about thinking through the profound implications of that. Whether you're Gaddafi in the barracks in Tripoli, or you're Mubarak in Cairo, or you are the British Prime Minister who's on holiday, the speed at which that got information out and created a significant political corporate challenge. Let me try and bring some bullet points to your mind at the moment, just to get over what I'm trying to say and why it's so profound. First of all, in my view, there is a new vulnerability, fragility, and brittleness of power in this new environment. Many in audiences say, it's not like that. And then when you sort of talk to them afterwards, you realize that the penny is slowly dropping in a very uncomfortable way. They do not want to embrace the fact that they are now more vulnerable, fragile, and brittle. As the police discovered over the Mark Duggan death, which was not an assassination, as the rumor said, and they should have entered the space, but they were vulnerable and brittle and fragile because they didn't want to enter the space. And the same thing is happening with NATO at the moment after the killing of 24 Pakistani soldiers in the middle of nowhere up on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border almost 2 weeks ago. Secondly, this is all forcing a new accountability. It's challenging right at the heart of everything that corporates and governments stand for. And thirdly, and this is the toughest thing to say, it's leading to a sense of a deficit of legitimacy. Because those like you who are looking at your smartphones and saying, well, I'm seeing it going on, why am I not hearing from those in positions of power and responsibility? It's that disconnect between what you and everyone out there is learning and the ability of the systems to even begin to know what's going on, let alone react and come out and place their whatever they know or however little they know into the public space. And it is about the speed. Here are some of you coming in here half an hour ago. It's the fact that that can be up and out there, and it can be up and out there amazingly quickly. Don't worry, your secret is safe with me. But I want to make that point because you need to think about it. And the former chief information officer at the White House, when I was at a conference at Harvard about 6 weeks ago, discussing all of this, Vivek Kundra, he's just left, we were having a conversation. He said this in the public space, and he said, by my estimation, he said, if this is a problem, so far you've only seen 0.001% of the challenge to power. And how in Washington they still can't get their minds around the fact that this is challenging them right, left and center. Because while what I'm showing you is highly significant, what you need to think about is that as well. You are moving. Because everything I've shown you is time shifted so far. And there you are. You need now to think of the webcam. We can now interview people from virtually anywhere in the world, providing they've got bandwidth or ability to get up there. I can now interview people on aircraft, because on many aircraft in the Middle East, certainly, they've got bandwidth. Well, we haven't actually tested it yet, but now they've started introducing it. Virtually everywhere but North Korea, we can now interview people, and we can record what's going on. For us, this is going to present enormous problems because of taste and decency, particularly we don't show time of death and that kind of thing. But this is the new reality, the webcam, which is time zero. And if what I've been showing you so far is a major challenge, think of the implications of this when it comes to events, whether in Whitehall or in Dalian in China or somewhere in the Middle East like Syria. It's changing amazingly fast and at a speed that most don't even have the first ability to catch up with. And it's not me who's saying that. It's those even who've been probably the sharpest operators and the sharpest to understand. And what happened in Norway on the 22nd of July is a very good example. The Norwegians, and I've lectured to them quite a few times, and I'm not trying to flatter myself because they're well ahead of the game, but they needed reassurance of the kind of thing that was going on. They're a NATO, member of NATO, they're involved in military operations, they feel vulnerable on the issue of terrorism. But listen to the Prime Minister, Stoltenberg, on the day after the dreadful events in Oslo and on Utøya Island. Even they couldn't be prepared enough to understand how profound this dynamic is and the implication it would have for them and for power. Here are the first pictures shot on a mobile phone of what happened at the Prime Minister's office with Breivik's bomb. But then listen to what Stoltenberg said when asked about the public reaction and the reaction of the government.
We have prepared, we have had exercises and a level of alert to be prepared for acts of terror. But it is a very great difference between some exercises and some kind of theoretical preparedness and to really experience the kinds of attacks we did on Friday.
You can never, ever get inside this new loop of information. That's the challenge. This is the BP disaster of just over a year ago in the Gulf of Mexico. And this shows really a level of complacency, dare I say arrogance, when it comes to understanding the process. BP, an enormous corporation, which is essentially in the risk business, really got involved in a public relations operation that was a failure. And Tony Hayward eventually walked the plank corporately and had to leave. But look at the way in which this was portrayed during that crisis, when America was crying out for the cool assurance and go do it of Tom Hanks in Apollo 13, they got bumbling Hugh Grant in 4 Weddings and a Funeral. This is about how someone is seen in the public space and the voracious, ruthless nature of it. Compare this to the pilots on board the A380.
How'd the meeting go, sir? Can you talk to us at all?
It was a very constructive dialogue.
Who's going to pay for this?
Excuse me, please, guys.
How did the meeting go?
It was very constructive, thank you very much.
I think it's now worth playing what he said exactly a year ago after he finally left as chief executive in a BBC interview about how ill-prepared even he as a chief executive of a major multinational was in this new environment. Sorry, I pressed the wrong buttons.
We tried to be open and transparent. We gave access to the operation. But the reality is we were completely overrun and just not prepared to deal with the intensity of the media scrutiny.
Not prepared to deal with the intensity of the media scrutiny. And that's what you see time and time again, and he lost his job over it. Not prepared to deal with the intensity of the media scrutiny. A sense of complacency, a sense of we are in charge, but a realization, and I've got many examples here, of how that information space is being turned on its head. Let me try and bring this to some kind of conclusion with what happens in a crisis, so that you can visualize what I've been saying for the last half hour. A moment of crisis hits, and let's hope it's not happening in Holloway Road at this moment. A crisis happens, and let's have a timeline along the bottom, and somehow measure the impact up the left-hand side of what is going on in this new media space. Let's say 36 hours along the bottom. I would say that the framing of institutional minds tends still to be this, which is the greatest impact 4, 6, 8 hours into a crisis, allowing for tapes or SD cards or uploading to take place. Therefore, we've got time to work out what is going on and respond. That's what I call the information age. But that's, in my view, of an age and a generation I don't recognize. Up there in the top left-hand corner is where we're moving towards. A much greater impact in a much shorter timeline. Much greater impact, and you can see the half-life of the information is maybe only 24 hours. But it's relentlessly moving towards zero. The information age is up in the top left, but the bottom right is moving towards zero. Less and less time to react, less and less time to even know what is taking place in this new environment, less and less time to discriminate, to filter, to validate that information that's coming in, like that tweet about Obama. Is it right or is it wrong? That tweet is here. How much time do you have to cope with it? If that was about Bhopal, how much time would Union Carbide have to cope with it? And so relentlessly, you're seeing the time for reaction, the time for assimilation, the time for realizing what is taking place in this institutional environment is ever shorter, which is why up in the top left-hand corner, that's where the tension is. Because the new media environment, webcams and everything I've shown you so far, is about here. The institutions are kind of prepared to respond and react and go public in that kind of timeline. There's a disconnect, the tyranny of real time. I'm faced with this problem, so are many. It's what I call F3. What do we do in this crisis? What do I and my colleagues at the BBC do if there is a major event? And we have to be careful, we have to get things right. F3, you can be first into the space, you can be fast into the space, but how flawed are you? How wrong are you? How mistaken are you with the information that you have? You're never going to get information perfection in those early minutes. The trouble is that's what a lot of people, particularly like that, through this, are expecting. It is therefore in this environment what I call a race for space on information. It's tough, It's nasty, it's relentless, it's ruthless. And it's probably going to be a zero-sum game. But you've got to accept that that's the new dynamic, whether you're in business or you're a politician or you're a leader of some kind. It is what I've called and christened over many years and warned about, not just about real time, but that tyranny of real time. Tyranny being the fact that it's cruel and arbitrary. You're never sure when it's going to happen. That's what catches institutions out in these times of crisis. Even the most sophisticated institutions of power, like, say, BP. They didn't realize 22% of social media in the United States was consumed by only one issue during the Gulf of Mexico, and that was BP and the Gulf of Mexico. But it's now become a tyranny, not just of real time, but of the timeline. That timeline that I showed you, that timeline is relentless in its driving. That is now presenting an acute new problem. So overall, it is becoming a battle for credibility in real time. Let me conclude with, I think, certainly one example here, which really highlights how, if you think you've got control, you never really do have that control. This is the killing of Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad in Pakistan back on the 7th of May, which of course is now underpinning the complete collapse of relationships between Pakistan and America, were made much worse by what happened with the killing of the 24 soldiers 9 or 10 days ago. Why am I showing you this? Because Obama and his planners had all the elements of surprise. There they were sitting in the Situation Room in the White House, watching an R-190 UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, a drone to you probably, flying around above Abbottabad, providing them with real-time pictures of what was going on. They were monitoring the 4 helicopters and the 79 SEALs who were flying in, with a 60 to 70% chance that bin Laden was inside that compound. Of course, we know they were right, and I'm told that Hillary Clinton wasn't actually going, oh my God, she was actually trying to stifle a cough. I don't know. I didn't get a tweet on that, but I'm just telling you. But the Americans had all the benefits of surprise as they entered that compound, not really knowing what was inside that compound. But they got inside and they found bin Laden, and as you know, he was killed along with others, and others were captured. They picked up a whole load of black bags, and within 38 minutes they had left the compound and were back on 3 helicopters because one of them crashed. It misjudged the downdraft and the tree. But the reason I'm telling you this is that the White House, in that Situation Room, believed it had full control of the information space, full operational control and full operational security of everything that was going on. What they hadn't bargained for, and most of you will know this anyway, is the 33-year-old tweeter who was sitting there, who'd gone to Abbottabad to get a little bit of free time and to get away from the rat race of Islamabad by hiding in the mountains with his laptops. He was sitting there watching all this going on, and this is the kind of thing that he was reporting early on that Sunday morning. Helicopter hovering above Abbottabad at 1 a.m. It's a rare event. A huge window-shaking bang here in Abbottabad. I hope it's not the start of something nasty. A big blast heard near the biggest military academy of Kabul. People are saying that that's due to a helicopter crash. And so it goes on. Security forces surround the place, and investigations are underway. A few people online at this time of night are saying one of the copters was not Pakistani. Funny, moving to Abbottabad was part of my being safe strategy. But the point I'm making is he was part of that information space. He was transmitting. He also posted a location map to iPhone and Facebook conveniently, so people knew exactly where it was happening, in case anyone was in any doubt. So you have a government which assumes it has essentially 100% secure control of everything that's going on. And you have a tweeter essentially pushing out the information. And it took the White House 3 days to get their act together and debrief everybody to get a clearer idea of what really had happened when the Abbottabad operation had finished. Even they took 3 days in this new environment. Well, in this new environment, 3 days is about where that door is on that map. This is the disconnect which there is between the ability of systems to cope with this new information space and the demands of that information space. It's relentless, it's ruthless, and you can try and fight it, but actually if you try to, the chances are you will be defeated. Many out there are saying it's the media, damn it. They are to blame. And if you're a corporate or a government audience, I'd say you've got to turn that on the head. You've got to see that this is not maybe a threat, but it's an opportunity as well. You've got to understand that this space is a very different space from the space that got you your job in the first place. It's changing amazingly fast. And I'll leave you with one final thought about the mindset of this, and all of you will be familiar with this. What happened with the super injunctions about the footballers and their wives? The Twitter users and the courts go to war earlier this year, and now we can talk about one or two footballers. If you remember, it came out that Ryan Giggs was one of those. Modern technology was totally out of control, said Lord Lodge, the Lord Chief Justice. Those who peddle lies on the internet must be fined. Well, 75,000 people tweeted Ryan Giggs' name. That's the disconnect now between the institutions of government and institutions in corporate life and the new realities of this environment. So let me leave it there. All I've managed to do is paint a picture which has got a number of highlights in it. What I have done, though, in my research is pulled together an enormous number of examples. And whereas it used to be every 2 or 3 days, or every 2 or 3 weeks, I should say, or maybe every month or so, now it is becoming every 2 or 3 days there's an example. And what I find is that level of denial that remains. And remember what I started off by saying, my bullet points. It's this new vulnerability, fragility, and brittleness of power. All of what I've shown you is forcing a new accountability. And ultimately, it's challenging those in power and challenging their legitimacy and creating a new deficit of legitimacy. And what I find interesting for me now, having been through the research process, when a lot of people who've just been in government or just been in corporate senior positions have been much franker than those in positions of, actually actively in positions of power, they talk about it much more openly now as a challenge which they were never really prepared to concede or admit to when they were actually running a board or a cabinet office. Now they accept that there's something profound which is going on. But if you're in that position of power, you're not prepared to really concede that you're under this kind of pressure. So let me leave it there. And you come back at me, disagree with me, challenge me. And like all my presentations, this is a kind of wiki experience. I'm always learning from an audience. There's a new angle which comes in. Some of you may have been in Whitehall during those protests or at Millbank, and you can tell me something different. But let me leave it there, and you challenge me on the questions. Who would like to come in, please?
Bilal Ayasre, a PhD student, London Metropolitan. Actually, my study is basically London Metropolitan. My study is basically about investigating the role of translators and biased reporters in shaping reality in times of wars. Nick, we know that the question of journalism and media is an arduous task and a thankless job. We agree on that. But actually, if you look for a definition for media and journalism, you will find very negative light on that. First, journalism is an organized gossip. The one who reads nothing at all is better educated than the one who reads nothing but the newspapers.
I think you're distracting me away from the point of that.
No, my question is very general, actually. In light of this, how do you first understand this paradox? Especially these definitions are basically...
Paradox of what?
Paradox, journalists, senior journalists define journalism in this way, by and large. How do we understand this paradox? Journalism are talking badly about their own business. Second, how can we change this stereotype in the mind of the public? Thank you.
Well, that's not really what I'm here to talk about how I define journalism, and you'll no doubt pick me up because you haven't given me any advance warning, and I haven't got a text, and I haven't been through it in my mind as an absolute definition. What I'm talking about here is the way the media space and the level of scrutiny is changing significantly. And I'm actually not going to answer your question because it'll be such a long answer, and I haven't thought it through in the way that you would like me to think it through. But there's a blurred line now between journalism as it has traditionally been and what is out there in the public information space. These new bearers of witness, people you'd never expect to be journalists, but they are bearing witness. Does that make them a journalist or not? They're providing information, but our job as journalists is to add value and to check and to question and to challenge, to be sure that what they're saying and what they've filmed hasn't been through Photoshop and been through a garbled mental process which has come out with something completely unrepresentative. Whether you're a monk on the right or you're a covered lady on the left, you wouldn't see them necessarily as journalists, but they are bearers of witness in this new public information space. And I'd ask you to think more broadly than just journalist. Right, who's got the microphone? Go to the back first. How many of you would like to say something? Then I can work out timings. Okay. Quite often I have to say what I do is suggest that there's also a tweet wall, so people can then watch what people are saying on the left-hand side. It's quite a dangerous thing to do, mind you. But
Ola Yerokin, London Metropolitan University. You talked about the flaw and the fastness of getting the story out. Do you think we're just going to have to accept that there would be that flaw because you just can't afford not to actually report a story? And if you're sort of taking the time to validate a story, something else sort of takes over your story and other people report it, and you're not actually in that space, as you say. And do you see the role of of the journalist really diminishing, and do you think he would actually become sort of more obsolete?
No. I've been in, as you can tell from the colour of my hair, and as the Dean said, I've been around a bit of a long time. I'm afraid I remember something called celluloid, which is known as film. And it came in cans, 400 feet, 10 minutes long. And the sound used to be attached by a magnetic strip. Don't think that I'm an old, whatever you want to describe me as. But for me, this is the most enriching time in journalism that I've ever had. It raises extraordinary questions about the way journalists have operated in the past and the way we do journalism. I would say that our feet are being held to the fire. Our feet are being held to the fire by the proliferation of information that's coming in. It's no longer, forgive me, James, as a former fellow BBC journalist, it's no longer just about the reporter. And I was a reporter. I went to a lot of wars. I almost got killed on several occasions. It's not about just my pair of eyes. It's now about a proliferation of eyes like this, who are keeping, I think, journalism more honest. Yes, there are people like the tweets, and that's why I put it up at the beginning, the breaking news that Obama's been assassinated. There are the people who are prepared to do that, to try and distort the environment and the picture of what is emerging. But in crowdsourcing and cloud sourcing, you tend to find them out pretty quickly. And we learned a very heavy lesson on the 7th of July 6 years ago with the bombs in London. We waited for the government to go beyond that this was a power surge. But within minutes, literally, and this was before Twitter, before Facebook, we were overwhelmed by emails and even video files which were being sent to us by email of what was happening on the 3 underground stations and then in Tavistock Square. We were too conservative to understand just how profound the change was. And our feet were being held to the fire that day, and other rival journalistic organisations were more self-confident about it. We can now, as you've seen, whether in London or in places like Moscow at the moment, we can now see what's going on at an amazingly high speed, and we can make a judgment. And if you've got a multitude of cameras, mobile phone cameras, all of which are pouring stuff in, and remember, YouTube now, 48 hours of video is being posted every single minute of the day. 48 hours. Much of it is amusing, but from our point of view, it's about this proliferation of material that's coming in and providing a whole bundle of sets of eyes, and we verify it. If we were doing Syria at the moment, we'd be waiting for travellers to come out. We'd have colleagues at the border with a satellite dish. But now it's the people themselves who are providing this, like these people. Now, are they journalists? No. But what they're doing, after we've been through the early days of anxiety about what we were really seeing, we're now seeing a confidence-building flow which we can take for granted is accurate. And that's what's so exciting about this new environment. And I do say, whether it's the truth, I'm not sure you can ever use the word truth in a very dynamic environment, but I do think we are getting, as with the Gaddafi, that's why I put it up there, that Gaddafi, just before he was killed, we had to be very careful with that. But someone is there and they're recording it, as opposed to a rumour that inserts someone called Gaddafi has been murdered, his body kind of nasty things happening to it, etc., etc. This is now what's happening, whether you're in Whitehall or you're in Sirte. And I've been through places like Afghanistan. I broke the news the Russians were leaving in 1988. We had to have a double hop on a satellite dish, and I was using video. The idea that we could be downtown Kabul with an explosion and it being out there in 5 minutes, forget it. It was 2 days. Now it's maybe 2 minutes. And with a webcam, it'll be 0 minutes. It's a profound change, and it's great for journalism, in my view. Who's got the microphone next? I'm going to bring the microphone forward.
Hi, I'm Ed Thompson. I work from a social media consultancy in London, and I'd love you to come and speak to some of my clients. It would be very helpful to...
Would your clients like me to come and speak?
No, they wouldn't.
Well, you see, that's why I asked the question, because many of them, are they corporates?
Some are corporate, some are public service, yeah.
They're wrenched by this, aren't they?
Well, the thing I was going to say is I'm maybe a little uneasy about your language, the tyranny of real time, because, I mean, who is it tyrannising? It's tyrannising maybe journalists who are concerned about their jobs. It's tyrannising corporates and people in power, but is it, it's not tyrannising us. Is it?
No, it's not at all. It's the tyranny of real time because of the definition, which if you check in the dictionary is cruel and arbitrary. It's a tyranny towards those who believe they have control of the information because they're not expecting it. It's a cruel and arbitrary hit below the belt. And that's what you see, whether you're in the Tokyo Electric Power Company with a puff of, I've got it all here, a puff of smoke coming out of Fukushima, or many, many examples. They're not expecting it, and they think that somehow they'll be able to control it. That's why it's tyrannical. So test me with your clients. Just take the microphone, can you? Take the microphone.
Should they be able to expect to control information that the public can make available? I mean,
forgive me, I don't think that's the question. Should they be able to expect?
Well, you're saying you're using the language of, it's below the belt.
Is it beyond that, I think.
Well, you said it's below the belt for this information to be shared and for corporations to be left behind. I mean, I don't feel sorry for them. Does anyone here feel sorry for them?
I don't either, but I think you're asking a question maybe of 2 or 3 years ago. Should we expect them? I think what I find is the resistance of what's going on. Remember, and I didn't make this point, remember the visceral response of the government here when the events took place in the summer after David Cameron came back, was to think of how they could control BlackBerry, BBM, and also Facebook, and they started talking to the suppliers. Now, remember what happened. The Chinese congratulated the British government for taking this attitude. Okay, they backed off that pretty quickly, but that's now happening in India, the biggest democracy in the world. So there is still an attempt in some people's minds, some institutional minds, to think that there is still that ability to control. I hear what you're saying, and I'm happy to think of changing my word tyranny, but I do think if you were from the corporate world as opposed to representing people or having a relationship with corporates who are your clients, you're seeing it as in a different way to the way they see it, which is what I call the OSH1T moment. The media are to blame, as opposed to we are to blame, we being the corporates or governments, for not really embracing this and understanding how profound this is and the impact on what we assume will be our role in a crisis. Who's got the microphone next?
Yeah, just a very quick question.
one of the videos you showed us was Gaddafi. Do you think the British media, especially the BBC, has gone too far for showing that graphic video?
I'm not an editor, I'm not a manager. What do you mean by showing it too far? We tend to have a view that, after all, I didn't show the moment of death. And we actually, I think, I wasn't actually in the office that day, but we do have a very clear series of guidelines, which is there's a limit beyond which we don't want to keep showing it. And we did try and show it, or we considered showing it at one point when there was a particular question about what happened, and the view was we shouldn't show it again. We might have shown a still, but certainly not what happened later, which was pretty very unpleasant. That's above my pay grade, or it's for managers to make that decision, but it's typical of the kind of difficult decision that's now having to be made in this environment. Even if that's available on YouTube and elsewhere, that doesn't make any difference. If you want to watch it, and the gory part of it, you can watch it, but not from us, in a gratuitous way. How many more people want to talk? Okay, 6, 7. Why don't you go there? I'm going to try and get round as many as possible, and you're going to look at me, James, like a good producer or floor manager. Wind up.
What I wanted to say is, you know how the media has a key influence in terms of how people think today and their ideas and how they perceive things. I was going to say, like, some things that they see in the media are sort of like biased in a way. Like, for example, how Muslims are portrayed in the media. Like, it influences the way people think and the way they act towards them or things like that. And I'm saying, like, although you think about to what extent is something true or not, like, I wanted to know, is that fair to influence people's ideas and thoughts and so, in, like, if something's portrayed negatively constantly?
I think you're leading me into a very delicate issue, which, in many ways, if you don't mind, I'm not here to talk about that. And I think I can give you a view.
Generally, like how people are portrayed and thoughts and things like that.
We are very sensitive to that, but it's not really central to what I'm talking to you about. I mean, it's an interesting discussion we could have, but if I open up that, we're going to get distracted away from my core message, if you don't mind. I'm not avoiding it, though. Okay. Right, let's move it forward. Do you mind? Just come forward, because they've been very patient at the front. I will come to you at the back.
Hi, my name is Milena Veselinovic. I'm a freelance journalist. I'm originally from Serbia, actually.
Where in Serbia?
From Belgrade.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, do you think, or how do you predict that governments and corporates will adapt to this new situation? And do you think that they can ever regain the power they had before this era of kind of instantaneous open information?
Well, rather in the same, what was both explicit and implicit by, sorry, I can't remember your name. What you said. I think they'll be struggling for a long time to come. I think the genie is out of the box. I think it'll be very difficult because, as all of you know, and the Chinese government is struggling with this at the moment about how to control, and it's something which is central to their planning before the change of leadership next year. They are deeply concerned. I think it's going to be very difficult, but we've been through the Google process. We're now going through it in India, strangely. We've been through it marginally here at one point. There are certainly national security implications. And there are ways of bringing down servers. There are ways of bringing down forms of transmission, as we experience from time to time at the BBC. But that's why I talk about it as Skyful of lies from Burma. Ultimately, they couldn't stop the message getting out. And Weibo in China is amazingly successful. How are they going to shut that down without really creating a complete blockage? And it's the same virtually anywhere. So if it happens, I will be somewhat surprised, even though some governments would like to do it. And for my answer to you, my direct answer to you is this: anyone who plans on the basis that that will happen, I think, is living on a different planet. I think you've got to plan on the basis that we are going to move from 0.001% to the next percentages extremely quickly in ways which most people haven't even begun to consider. I don't think most people have even thought about the influence of the webcam and how immediate that's going to be. And therefore, before anyone is at their desk in an office building knows what's happened, it's out there in the public space and people are monitoring it. So I I don't view the answer to your question with optimism if you look at it from the corporate point of view of trying to shut things down.
No, not necessarily trying to shut it down, but kind of sort of adapting in a way of sort of functioning in this new system, just adapting the philosophy of, I suppose, governments or corporates.
That's different. I do see some who are prepared to change, but they're in a very small minority at the moment, and I think they're far too slow. I think this sounds very maybe self-serving, but I think most have not been prepared to understand the profound intellectual challenge which is being changed by the technology, not by us as journalists, but by the technology. And the technology is driving us.
Thank you.
By the way, I mean, you come from Serbia, but I think one of the things I think about is what happened in the 1992, 93, 94, 95, 96, and I think to myself, what would it have been like in the Balkan Wars if we'd had mobile phones rather than these enormous suitcase phones and uplinks, if we'd been up on the inter-ethnic boundary lines between the Croats, the Serbs and the Bosniaks, with mobile phones reporting what was going on. I think a lot of people would have been shot dead for it. It would have been brutal, nasty, unpleasant. Who's next, please? Yeah, I will forget you.
Hello, my name is Oliviero. Third year London Met, Business and Marketing. You kind of touched it now, but I'd like to go a little bit more in depth in talking a little bit more. You could talk about corporates, government responsibility, and everything else. But what about criminality? For example, I come from Italy. Okay, it's kind of cliche, but it's true. I mean, there's a lot of mafia going on, from the lower to the top levels, and everybody in Italy has his story closer or farther from himself, and I got few as well myself. How is that going to change? I mean, you talk about like validation of the information and everything, but we for example, talking about BBC, you did a report about Saviano, and what is it still gonna? It's gonna be like that for I mean, on a criminality level, journalism. Is it still gonna be? You do a book about giving names and you're done with your life, or do you feel like it's gonna change? And if it's so, how?
I'm not sure I've got an answer to that. I mean, look what's happened in Russia. And I don't need to go through the details of the challenge. I'm sorry, I don't know how to put an answer unless
like
you
in your opinion, I mean, what do you expect?
I'm not sure. I need to think about it. I'm sorry, I haven't given it any thought. Okay. Let's go here. And I'll come to you.
I don't actually see how a major organisation can meet your F3 target, because you can't delegate major decisions to the juniors who monitor YouTube, and the chief exec can't monitor everything that's going on. So how would an organisation adapt?
I think that's a very good question. There are ways of doing it, I think, which is to devolve power, devolve responsibility, which many of them are reluctant to do. I take your point, but I think this is one of the reasons I showed the media space turning on its head. I think actually the corporate environment has to be turned on its head, because most people, as we saw with the Tokyo, I mean, I could show you all of this, but with Tokyo Electric Power, one of the reasons after Fukushima that their public image became so disastrous and they simply weren't trusted was because it took too long for the information to get through the system, even though the information was there. And so my halfway house answer to you is what you've got to do is create a system, particularly among the next generation who are occupying the lower levels of the company or the middle ranking now, who are frustrated. For me, I'm amazed 41,000 people downloaded my document in the second year after publication. That suggests to me, and I've not downloaded them all myself, that suggests to me that there are a lot of people out there who are wanting to grip this problem with empowerment and the implications in a corporate environment or a government environment. And they're frustrated by what they hear from the top, because the top doesn't seem to engage or to understand the implications. So, but if you were the British military, I'd be saying, if a private or a sergeant is actually empowered to take a squad out and kill people or handle people, they should be responsible enough to give you a view of what has taken place, and it not to be a career breaker. If there's a threat of being a career breaker, then all bets are off, because people say, I won't talk to anyone. So it can be done, and I think it needs a brave rethink. But remember, one of the words I put up there is behaviour. And that behaviour comes from the top and from lower down. But the people lower down have got to be empowered as part of their job. And I think that's a real challenge, and I think it's an important challenge. Let's go there. I know time is running out. 2 more questions, and I'll come to you at the end.
Hi there. In regards to how social media challenges more authoritative power nowadays, especially, for example, with the case of the summer riots, and I know there was a lot of, I don't know if there's any truth to the rumours that were going around on Twitter and stuff, and the people that I engage with, but I have a lot of friends and stuff who can relate to Mark Duggan, who are from the Tottenham area, who knew him personally and stuff. And then they were saying some of the things that were reported on the news were false. And so, in regards to how the situation can be resolved, I think, is it possible that the more authoritative powers can kind of engage in the systems that we use? So kind of like, I don't know, how celebrities like Jack Wilshere and stuff have a Twitter account, and they kind of engage with the fans and stuff, so you feel more of a connection to them, so you can kind of take their word for the truth. Whereas I feel like authoritative powers are so distant from us nowadays that if they were to say that Mark Duggan's shooting wasn't actually to be as true as they say it was, and then I've got someone who's related to Mark Duggan saying, no, he's just come out of prison and something has happened and he's been shot. You can't, I mean, you've got to make the judgments for yourself to, who do I believe here?
You're making my point for me, and let me just go back to where we started. I realise this is a very sensitive issue, so don't draw me too far down this track. But when you get a report like this, coming out and saying what I remind you what he said right at the beginning, there needs to be a review of the protocols in the light of social media and the viral space, because it'll be filled with rumour. That's what I've been warning about for a long, long time. A tweet can be a rumour, like Barack Obama. A tweet is gossip, but it's written down. Now, how much value do we put on gossip? In this space, with that, remember what that was said about the police. Why didn't they go into the space? And I'm asking the question which they've asked, which was, if anyone's writing this down, it's not me that's saying this, it's actually in the report. They should have gone into the public space very quickly and said that Mark Duggan was not, quote, assassinated, unquote. But that's the space that I'm talking about here. In the police world, it's difficult, obviously, but it's got to be done. If you're an ISAF commander in Afghanistan and there's been an airstrike that's gone wrong, you need to enter that space to say, look, we perhaps made a mistake, as opposed to nothing's gone wrong and leaving it silent. That's the point I'm making, legitimacy. Remember, a deficit of legitimacy, and that's what comes out in the report about what happened in the summer. The legitimacy of the police was very severely undermined by their reaction to what happened to Mark Duggan. Look, I'm not an expert on this, and I'm picking it up secondhand. But that is just in the same frame as all that I've been warning about. Why didn't the police enter that space? Why didn't the military enter that space? Why didn't BP enter that space? Because it comes back to, you're right to pick me up on F3, because I have to go through that when I'm on air. F3, I can be first and fast, but how wrong am I? Because if you're in a terror operation or an insurgent operation, that's when it's sticky, because you know the person running it may be watching me to make his own tactical judgments. So you're right to raise that point, and I can only urge that those, including the corporates who have a corporate lawyer sitting alongside the chief executive saying, don't say anything. In my view, the damage now of not saying anything is far greater than any legal implications 2 years down the track. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you. My name's Chris Lane. I'm a lecturer here at London Met, and I was interested in your idea about the public information space. And I was thinking about it reminding me of arguments about the early days of the internet, when people said that information just wanted to be free, that somehow spontaneously, as a result of the web-based technologies and internet-based technologies, that we would have a sort of resurgence of a public space. And I think one of the things that people have observed about what's happened with the World Wide Web more recently is that it's become a very privatised space. So actually, all of the channels through which the content that you've been talking about are conveyed seems to me increasingly privately owned. And I think that's a sort of interesting contradiction in a way to some of the things that you've said. And I was thinking about the idea of Raymond Williams that power is reproduced through generations of technology. Power relations are reproduced through and re-established through successive generations of technology, and that somehow the technology doesn't necessarily determine itself new kinds of power. And I was thinking about how maybe instances of how perhaps corporations or governments might have new forms of power, and I suppose one of those might be to do with the fact that we've got these new corporations like Facebook and Twitter, and who effectively make their money by selling our data and owning the data about every part of our everyday lives. All of my children's, everything, all my children's statements that they make all through their childhoods are now captured in micro detail, and I think that's quite a significant issue. I suppose there's a sense in which, thinking about the logic of user-generated content, one of the ideas about the media and user-generated content is that users are now kind of doing the work for free for media corporations, and media corporations are monetizing the work of ordinary people and not necessarily paying them back. So can I just make one tiny last comment? And I was thinking that in the logic of the corporation and these new forms of technology, that in your timeline there's something else going on, which is in the nanosecond, before your timeline even begins. It seems to me that there is a new power constraint that is exerted by corporations in the coding of the systems that we're all operating within. That'll do.
I think your question about monetizing has become a red herring in this environment. Early on, people were expecting they might get a bit of money for it. What I think is amazing in this environment is that people just want to record what's happening, and just like the idea it's going to be used. If money is changing hands, I don't know where it's changing hands, but maybe I'm behind the curve on this, I don't know. But after what's happened with phone hacking and so on, I think it's going to be a very different space in which we're operating. I don't think those in Syria or those at London Airport really want to be paid for it. They just want to know what's going on. And that's what drives them now to get the information out there and to complain at the same time as well, creating this new vulnerability. As to your issues about the commercial side, I think that's for another day, because I'm not talking about monetizing. I'm talking about a process that's underway, and it's happening amazingly fast. People are losing their jobs, powers, and ultimately their heads, their reputation, their brand, their image, whether you're a president or a chief executive or you're somewhere else in the food chain. Reputations can be made or broken very quickly in this environment, and most are not even prepared to concede just how profound the challenge is for the status quo.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's probably all we've got time for. There are refreshments. Please take the opportunity to talk. Comments there's a camera here if you want to give your impressions of tonight. But I would like to just
I better look at that, hadn't I?
To say a very big thank you to Nik for coming to the university and sharing his very interesting presentation.
James, you had no notice of this. What was it like when you were in Moscow being interviewed by me, when you heard me in the earpiece? Like that?
Challenging occasionally, Nik, let's say.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. Challenging.
But you always elicit the most concise and clear answers.
Of course, yeah.
As a result of your persistent, precise question.
Indeed. Thank you for inviting me anyway.
Well, thanks very much indeed for coming.